Good evening, everyone. I'm Indrani Rawat from ASHRAE India chapter, organizing this indoor environmental Seeing the Invisible. Now, I wanted to introduce Rajasthan chapter also. They are organizing this co-organizer, and we have the privilege to have Mr. Varun with us, who is going to speak on indoor environmental control, Seeing the Invisible. Let's talk about Mr. Varun. Varun Agarwal is the founder and CEO of Breathe Easy Consultants Private Limited. He has co-authored a book, How to Grow Fresh Air, published by Judgmont Books. He is currently the chapter director for IAQA, Indoor Air Quality Association, India chapter. He is member of ISHRAE and is a founding member of the IAQ committee of ISHRAE that has developed the first international standard for IAQ. He is also technical group chair for indoor air quality TG under ISHRAE. Before starting with Mr. Varun, I'd request everyone that they can have the downloads from the handouts, and at the end, they can fill the evaluation forms or evaluation survey so that we can get the feedback. I hope you're going to have a great session. Over to Varun.
Thank you very much, Anjani. Very good evening, everyone. I am very excited to be here this evening to talk about indoor environmental control. It's a topic which is very, very passionate and dear to my heart. I have been working in the space of indoor air quality for the last 7 years myself, and our organization has been working on air quality for the last 30 plus years. Some of the largest projects on air quality, the first building in Delhi to be certified by the Central Pollution Control Board is ours, and hence the experience in this space is tremendous. Very excited to present, and thank you to ASHRAE India chapter and ASHRAE Rajasthan chapter for jointly hosting this webinar with the Indoor Air Quality Association, the India chapter. I am the India chapter director for Indoor Air Quality Association USA, and very, very happy to be here and presenting this session. So there are 4 key pillars of indoor environment, and I'm not going to go deep into all 4. We are going to talk about only the first one through the rest of this presentation, air. But there are 4 key pillars of indoor environment. Air is one of them, where we will go a little deeper and understand what some of the parameters are and why it is invisible and how we can make that invisible visible. The second one is thermal comfort in terms of temperature. A lot of people, this is something which has been very common in terms of air conditioning, cooling. Thermal comfort is very common even with a simple fan. Acoustics, of course, in terms of noise, it has an impact on our environment, on our productivity, and on our well-being. And of course, the light, in terms of how the lighting is in a given space, affects your mood, your recovery when you're ill, the circadian rhythm, etc. So these are the 4 main pillars of indoor environment, but today we're going to focus more and more on air quality. So what's the agenda for the day? So we're going to spend about 45 minutes on the presentation, and we'll keep about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. We'll talk about air quality. What is air quality? What is the main pollutant that we're worried about in terms of what's invisible and how can we make it visible? Why should we monitor? How 24/7 monitoring is different from lab testing. We'll talk about some of the monitoring hardware standards that are currently available. How should you deploy monitoring hardware and what are we measuring really? And finally, data analysis and automation in the space. So let's start with air quality. So there are 3 broad buckets that I like to divide air quality into. The first one is particulate pollution, the second one is gaseous pollution, and the third one is microbiological pollution. In today's world, I think the maximum focus is on that third bucket because the viruses fall under microbiological pollution. I'll talk about that in a bit, but I'm going to start with the left, which is the particulate pollution. So anything that is suspended in the air and which is a physical matter, a particle which stays suspended in the air because it is very small in size is called particulate matter. It may be 10 micrometers in diameter or smaller, which is PM10, or 2.5 micrometers in diameter or smaller, which is PM2.5, or 1 micrometer in diameter or smaller, which is PM1. There are long-term health effects associated with particulate pollution, and we need to be very aware and critical of this in terms of our health. The second bucket is gaseous pollution. There's a lot of ozone in the air. There are volatile organic compounds in our indoor spaces. There's a lot of nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide that comes outdoors and can potentially find its way indoors. And we have to ensure that all of these harmful gases we are protected from. There are many other gases that we can also target, like if you're living next to an open nala, there might be hydrogen sulfide. And so there could be a whole bunch of other gases that one can or may need to be aware of. And now coming to the third bucket, the bacteria, virus, and mold. The bacteria and mold are simple. If you have any high levels of mold in a space, it can be harmful for your health, and you want to ensure that you do proper treatment. We do a lot of treatment for mold in basements where there's more problem of moisture. Bacteria, of course, if there's bacteria in the air, you want to, some exposure to bacteria and viruses is okay. But certain bacteria and viruses can be very harmful to you, and in larger numbers they can be, some of the others which are otherwise safe can also be harmful to you. Nowadays the biggest conversation is around virus, COVID-19. It is a virus that is invisible. Nobody knows where it is, nobody knows when they touch it, and you can't even easily measure it. Even testing it in human beings is difficult, let alone being able to test it on a surface or in the air. It's a very, very difficult test to do. However, there are certain articles which talk about how the COVID-19 is potentially more affecting more people if there is PM2.5. So essentially the size of the virus is the critical part, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So let's talk about the PM2.5 first in terms of size. One human hair is about 50 to 70 micrometers in diameter. And we're talking about a particle which is 2.5 micrometers in diameter or smaller, which is PM2.5. So it's nearly 1/30th of the human hair. And now it goes all the way down. Typically, measuring technology for PM2.5 measures particles from 0.3 micrometers in diameter up to 2.5. And that entire spectrum is called PM2.5. Normally, we would like to measure everything from 0 till 2.5, but measuring technology that is available today is restricted such that it only allows us to measure particles from 0.3 micrometers in diameter up to 2.5 micrometers in diameter. And the coronavirus that we are all affected by right now in some way or the other, and when I say affected, doesn't mean we are infected, we are affected, meaning our life in some way or the other is impacted because of coronavirus. That has a size of 0.1 micrometers in diameter. So measuring technology 0.3 till 2.5 for PM2.5, but coronavirus is 0.1. Now what happens is this 0.1 particle over here attaches itself to a 2.5, or it sits on a PM2.5 particle, and it is able to get transported better. Now, if this PM2.5, which, if we are measuring down to 0.3, and traditional filtration technology is not only filtering particles down to 0.3, but potentially it will filter particles down to 0.1 and even smaller particles if you have the right technology. Then if we are measuring 2.5 and we get a very low reading and we have the right filtration to reduce it, we can be fairly confident that within that space, the potential of coronavirus will be reduced dramatically. So PM10 on the right, red blood cell is 7 micrometer, PM2.5, bacteria bacillus is 0.5, and coronavirus is 0.1 micrometers in diameter. So I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19. Is it airborne? Do I need to worry about it in my air? And for that, I'm going to show you a quick video, and I'll talk about it after the video.
I'm recording.
It's a quick recording.
Stay healthy. Stay healthy.
Great. That's loud.
Stay healthy.
Good.
So that was somebody saying 2 words with a mask, and now with a mask.
Stay healthy.
Louder.
Stay healthy.
Louder.
Stay healthy.
Nothing.
So you can see that with the mask, the particles from the mouth did not fly out into the air. With the mask, without the mask, the particles were flying out into the air. If somebody is infected with COVID-19, then those particles that come out, they will fall on surfaces, they will go into the air, and they will potentially impact people around them. Hence, wearing a mask is very important. But what happens when those particles do come into the air is that when those droplets, the saliva droplets, start to evaporate, the smaller ones, what gets left behind, they become smaller and smaller in size, and hence they travel longer distances as it evaporates. And that's where some of it can potentially be airborne if it is caught in a space with an air conditioning system with a high level of draft. So that is what the challenge of COVID-19 is in a closed space with regards to air conditioning. Now, there is news articles which says that air pollution and PM 2.5 raise the risk of COVID-19 death. So right there is a link between COVID-19 and PM 2.5. There is another article in the Indian Express which says that not ambient air, but PM 2.5 shows correlation with COVID-19 mortality. There's a SAFAR study, which is the Indian Meteorological for Air Quality Testing, and says that not just normal outdoor air, but PM 2.5 shows correlation with COVID-19 mortality. So I love to go to this particular chart, which is by Johns Hopkins. And every few days I go back. I've been following this for the last 3 months or so. And earlier, India was nowhere to be found in the top list. And slowly, India was inching its way up the list. Last week, it was at number 14. This week, it is at number 11. And I believe, given how we are opening up the country, India might continue to rise up these charts, unfortunately. So we've at close to 5 million total cases. This is as of earlier today at 4 p.m. India time. And so 4.9 million cases. My question when I show this slide is complete mitigation even possible? Everything I talk about over here in terms of PM 2.5, in terms of measuring the invisible or monitoring the invisible, can I completely mitigate the risks associated with that once we measure and we fix the problem of PM 2.5? And the answer to that is not necessary. The answer to that is no. The reason for that is the main method of transmission of COVID-19 is through particles that are coming out of individuals' mouths and the fluid that comes out. And that fluid can very easily be on a surface, and the touch from individual people is what will spread. So the hygiene of wearing a mask, the hygiene of sanitizing spaces is more important and critical in order to ensure that proper safety happens. However, every single step that you take in a facility in terms of filtration, in terms of sanitization, in terms of hand sanitizer, hand washing hands, each step will help and improve the risk potential and reduce the risk overall in terms of spreading the virus. So you can't manage what you can't measure. That's the first thing, that the mantra that we live by in the world of air quality. We've got to measure, then only we'll be able to manage what is going on. So why monitor? Let's understand what is the benefit of monitoring, and we're going to focus on PM 2.5. We've created the link between COVID-19 and PM 2.5. Now we're going to create the link between PM 2.5 and monitoring, because if we can ensure that my PM 2.5 levels are reduced with proper filtration and we can monitor that, then the possibility of COVID-19 in the air automatically reduces. So one lesser potential risk factor. So the pains in monitoring, the boss who does monitoring says that I've spent thousands of rupees or lakhs of rupees on air solutions. I need to know whether it works or not. The boss wants a one-stop integrated solution, but how do I know if the results are of my filtration system are correct or not? So I want a proper monitoring system. The staff says, is my work, there's a message over here I'm trying to see. Okay, sorry. The staff says, who's working in the office facilities asks, is my work environment healthy? How can I trust the data? So every stakeholder has a different reason of why they want to monitor. The solution provider says, I need to know when my system fails before my client does. So if I have a monitoring solution, I can get alerts in advance. The hardware supplier says that I need to connect to multiple other hardware, so I need an IoT solution. The facility manager says, I don't know how well my building is performing and how the parts work together. And so every stakeholder has its own story and the whole own reason as to why they would want monitoring. From a client's perspective, it's an early warning signal. It will allow to better operate the building. It will demonstrate results to the occupants. It will benchmark performance across different floors, buildings, time periods, and potentially can get you green buildings accreditation and points as well. So here I want to talk about the main difference between real-time monitoring and lab testing. Everybody up till now understands lab testing, which is essentially you call a lab, they come in with high quality equipment, they run tests for a few minutes, for a few hours, and they leave your facility and then they send you a long, thick report, which gives you the results from testing from that particular day and point in time. However, the trends are changing and more people are putting real-time 24/7 monitoring in place. Now, what I want to talk about is that there's a space and there's a place for both of these types of monitoring. It's not necessary that one needs to replace the other. For example, the greatest analogy that I could get, or the simplest analogy that I could get to explain that, was a video camera versus a high definition still camera. So the surveillance videos that we put with the video cameras, they are not very high definition, very high grain videos. They're typically regular quality video, and it's being taken 24/7 and recorded on a hard drive on the back end. And if anytime something happens, then we can come in and take a high definition photograph of that space to understand what the problem really is within that space. Same thing with the testing of air quality. We have 24/7 monitoring, which has low cost sensors, and hence you can deploy them in multiple locations more cost effectively. And then you have lab testing, where if you found a problem, let's say I found a problem where on one particular day, using my 24/7 monitoring, I say that on a Tuesday morning, I'm getting a particular smell of VOC. Now I talk to the facility manager, and if they say, oh yes, Tuesday morning we get pest control done, then I know my problem solved. I've been able to figure out the problem without even coming in with a expensive lab test. But if they say, no, nothing special happens on Tuesday morning, I don't know of anything, so then we can come in with lab test equipment on a Tuesday morning and measure and understand where and why that particular source of the problem is coming from. So there is a space for both kinds of testing, real-time monitoring and lab tests, depending on what is needed. So monitoring reveals the big picture. Essentially, think of on the left, you've got this report from the lab test, and on the right, you have 24/7 monitoring. So on the left, somebody came at a certain time in the morning and they did a reading, and in the reception area, they got a reading of 834. I said, great, no problems. Now for that same location, if there was a 24/7 monitor, and you saw, oh, on a particular day, it is actually going above, my carbon dioxide load is going above 1500 parts per million versus 834, then I know something is wrong over here in this space and I need to do something. So the big picture helps me make the right decisions in terms of what I need to do with the space, in terms of what I need to do with my air quality, filtration, fresh air, versus just a spot testing that a lab would do. So there's a space for both depending on when you need to do what. So choosing the right hardware for this monitoring, the number of sensors that are being available in the market is increasing on a regular basis. To give you an example, when I started in this business about 6-7 years ago, one sensor for measuring PM 2.5 was approximately $8,000 to $10,000. Today, that but a similar low-cost sensor for measuring PM 2.5 can be got easily for as little as $150 to $200, and it will connect to an app. It will give me 24/7 readings, and it does all of that. Now, of course, there's a big difference in the two. Even that same $10,000 monitor is still available for about $10,000 today. So there's a place for both. The 10,000 monitor is EPA approved, it's certified, it's used for lab testing, whereas the $200 is a consumer grade sensor. So you have sensors for particulate matter, for chemical off-gassing, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. Other gases are being added as they become more reliable and available, like nitrogen dioxide, ozone, formaldehyde. For comfort, you have sensors like relative humidity, temperature, light intensity, color temperature, circadian lighting is coming soon, noise. And then soon you'll start seeing resources like energy, gas, water, absenteeism, and fitness start to get integrated into sensors. Occupancy sensors are also becoming very common, where you can, based on the occupancy, decide how much fresh air to give in, because you know how much carbon dioxide off-gassing will happen depending on the number of people within that given space. So monitoring standards, there are 3 grades of standards. I've kind of alluded to that earlier. Grade A is EPA approved reference grade monitors, which are very expensive. Grade C are the $200, $150 sensors, which I call consumer grade monitors. And grade B is somewhere in the middle. It gives you the performance of a grade A monitor, closer to a grade A performance and closer to a grade C price. And that we're calling a commercial grade monitor, which is used in commercial projects. Reset is an air quality standard, which has been developed by a team in China, and it is now becoming the de facto standard on air quality. And it is then talking with other standards like USGBC's LEED standard. It's also talking with other green building standards, so that if you've got reset, then automatically the points related to air quality will be awarded to that project. So what kind of monitor should you get? Should you get a professional grade monitor? Should you get a building grade monitor or a consumer grade monitor? So the criteria you want to look at is accuracy, range, sensitivity, consistency, and how easily they are calibratable. Calibration is a very important factor in these sensors, because over a period of time they will drift, and it's very important to ensure that the quality of sensor that you get doesn't drift, and if it drifts, you can calibrate it easily. Most of the calibration today happens outside India, and you have to send your sensors outside. Some of the lower cost sensors can be calibrated or changed more easily in India, and hence you have to choose carefully in terms of what product you want to invest in. So an example of an A-grade monitor with 5 parameters is a Particles Plus monitor. I have a dozen of various kinds of A-grade monitors. We have a few of these as well. This is the 5302 AQM and the 7302 AQM, depends on the battery or not. And the PM1, PM2.5, PM5, PM10, it measures temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, and TVOCs. Various connectivity in terms of Ethernet, USB, it has a Modbus protocol, a whole bunch of features, which is, we call it an A-grade, EPA approved reference grade monitor. A B-grade sensor is, on the left is the Kythera Sense Edge, very sharp looking product, which has all the features of a reset certified grade B sensor. And on the right, we have the Ayurveda, which is made in India. Again, a reset certified product for India, made in India. Now, how do you deploy monitors? A lot of questions people will ask me all the time. How many should I deploy? Where should can I install it on the ceiling? Should I put it on the floor? Where exactly should I deploy? The answer to that is simple. What the solution provider wants is right where my outlet of the grill is, let's put it there. The air purifier, the portable air purifier manufacturer wants to put the sensor right inside the air purifier. The end user in the office says, can you put a sensor on my desk? I want to know what I am reading. And everybody says, you know, based on their situation, they will tell you where they want that particular sensor to be placed. But what is the correct place to place it? So the reset standard will also tell you where to place the sensor. As per the commercial interior, it will say that it must be in the breathing zone or the representative zone, which is 3 feet from the ground up to 6 feet from the ground. And you would typically put one sensor in about 5,000 square feet of space. And in a core and shell kind of deployment, you would put it where the pre-filtered fresh air is coming out from, so that the building is giving good air to the spaces, because you're not sure what kind of materials would be used by the occupants, because it's a core and shell certification. The next thing, I talked a little bit about calibration earlier, and maintenance also. Even In terms of calibration, typically sensors have to be calibrated once per year. TVOC is typically a very unstable sensor. Relative humidity also frequently drifts. Carbon dioxide can be easily self-calibrated. You can take it outside, hit reset, and typically you would get 400 parts per million calibration, because outdoor CO2 levels are typically up around 400 for CO2. Don't rely on the manufacturer for initial accuracy. Always verify the product upon receipt of shipment. This is important because a lot of times, right out of the box, the product can drift more than what is acceptable. So checking that at the time of receiving the product is important to ensure that you have high quality product giving you accurate readings. Interpreting the data and the software comes next. So the next part, now you've got the monitoring in place. Let's assume you've got the filtration in place. You've got some sort of a cloudware dashboard notifications in place, and you've got also connected to an outdoor monitoring station. So now you are getting data from outdoor. What is the air quality outside? What is the air quality inside my space? And based on that, now your hardware in terms of filtration is optimized so that you get maximum results for your entire solution. So the system performance validation will happen with your overall system. So in this particular case, we can tell that the filtration is inadequate, because as soon as the outdoor readings start to go past 70 micrograms per cubic meter, indoor air becomes unhealthy. So we can see over here that the red line is the outdoor reading, and the gray line is the indoor office reading. The moment we got above a point of about 70 to 80 micrograms per cubic meter right here, that's when outdoor readings the indoor reading started to go above the acceptable level, and it went high. And hence we got a 52% average reduction rate of PM2.5. And hence we need to increase the quality of filtration in the space, so that at these hours, when outdoor readings go high, then my indoor readings should also stay within the safe levels. So validation of my system is very easy if I have good quality 24/7 monitoring in place. And then we have the on-demand automation and system improvement. The smart system operates based on actual air quality conditions. And not only can you get energy savings of up to 70 to 80%, but more importantly, you increase your filter life. And this is a very important one, because some of it is this is very new in the industry. We've been working on this for the last few months, and we've deployed these in a couple of locations. But it's very interesting, because now your entire system is talking to each other. You have your outdoor monitor, you have your indoor monitor, you have your filtration system, and you have your control system. So each one is talking to the control system, and the control system then will tell the filtration system whether it should run at a high speed, at a low speed, it should turn on or off. All the logic behind this is built into the EcoSmart control system, and the logic will then determine how much this unit should run in terms of filtration and in terms of cooling. So not only will that save you energy, because if it's not required, I will turn the system off, or I will put it on low speed, saving energy, but it will also increase the life of the filters, which is one of the larger costs from an operating expense perspective. So automated versus manual operation, there's a big difference. You can see over here that when this line up over here is when the whole system was on manual operation, and when we put it on automatic operation with the Eco Controller, then we got the red line results. So we can see very clearly over here that you were able to get good results under the green line when it was on automatic, but when it was manual, someone either forgot to turn on the system, or they turned it on late because they came late in the morning, they forgot to turn it off later, etc., etc. There are multiple reasons that can happen with manual operation, which are taken care of when the whole system is automated, and you get much better results. So that's about measurement of air quality. I did want to talk about one more thing with regards to the measuring the invisible. And it was here, I want to talk about a fingertip pulse oximeter. because an oximeter measures blood oxygen saturation levels and the pulse rate. There is enough evidence which says that when you're asymptomatic with COVID-19, your blood oxygen saturation levels will go down. Now, if you can get an SpO2 meter easily, or if you have one, you should measure that on an everyday basis. It's a simple test. You plug that little device on your finger, and within 10 to 15 seconds, it gives you a reading of your SpO2 levels. Now, an SpO2 reading should be between 95% and 100%. The closer to 100, the better off your lungs are. And in most people, it will test at 97, 98, 99%. However, if you're asymptomatic and you have a problem in your lungs, your SpO2 levels can go down below 95%. And that could be an early indicator that there is some problem in the lungs. It could be a normal viral infection in the lungs. It could be some other problem in the lungs, or it could potentially also be COVID-19. So what we do is we measure every person coming into the office in the morning. Of course, it's not non-touch. So we sanitize hands, then we clip this device onto the finger, and then we ask them to wash or sanitize hands again. The device will give us a reading, and if it is below 94, then we take another reading after 10 minutes, and if it is still below 94, then that person is sent home, and a day later, if it comes again at below 94, then we would send him for testing in a diagnostic laboratory for a lung function test, and if required, a COVID-19 test. So this is not only does it a potential for telling us about COVID-19, but it's a great device to have otherwise also, because it tells me on a regular basis the health of my lungs. And this has also, we've been able to connect this to intelligence and productivity. So in our building in Paharpur Business Center, we have been able to maintain carbon dioxide levels below 600 parts per million in that building for the last few years, for last many years. And we've been measuring the blood oxygen saturation levels of every participant in that building, of every occupant of that building over the last many years. What we do is when they come in the morning, we measure their SpO2 level. And when they leave in the evening, we measure the SpO2 level. And what we found is that in the Paharpur Business Center, which is PBC, there is a 42% probability that your blood oxygen saturation level will go up by 1% from morning to evening by being in that building for about 10 hours. And there is a 13% probability that it will go down when you're in Paharpur Business Center. Now, the same thing, there is a 39% probability that it will go down by 1% in other buildings. We measured the same thing in other buildings which did not have the air quality systems that we have. And there is an 8% probability that it will come down by 1% in the other buildings. So 42% it will go up in PVC, 13% probability it will go up by 1% in increase by 1% in other buildings. And here 39% probability it will go down in other buildings by 1% and 8% probability it will go down by 1% in Paharpur Business Center. So now you'll say, what's the big deal? 1% increase, 1% decrease, how does it matter? Let me very quickly explain that. The range of blood oxygen saturation, as I mentioned earlier, is between 95 to 100%. If you are at 96 when you come in the morning and you leave at 97 in the evening, or you leave at 95 in the evening, that is a swing of 2%. 95, 97, 2% swing potentially. Now, a 2% swing, when the range is only a 6% range, is very, very significant. And when you're below 94, then it means you have a major problem in your lungs. And when you're below 85, 80, chances are you will need an oxygen tank to breathe. That's how severe the conditions can get if the reading gets much lower. So that reading is very significant, and even a 1 to 2% swing can have a huge impact on human intelligence and human productivity. And the tests we've done actually show that to us. Low carbon dioxide, there's a Harvard study which talks about reduced carbon dioxide with other lower pollutants like TVOCs and PM2.5 can actually increase test scores, and hence productivity and intelligence of people can be improved. We've done the same thing in homes, we've done the same thing in offices by increasing the amount of fresh air. we are able to reduce the PM 2.5 concentration. We are able to reduce the carbon dioxide concentration. In my bedroom, for example, my PM 2.5 all night is 0 micrograms per cubic meter. My CO2 with 2 people sleeping is about 600 to 700 parts per million. Earlier, before we were able to figure out the solution, the carbon dioxide with 2 people sleeping in an air-conditioned room would go up to about 2,600 parts per million at night. So when the outdoor levels are 400, anything above 800 is not considered very healthy. And in your bedroom, chances are it goes up to 2,600 parts per million if 2 people are sleeping. Now, if you are able to reduce that, wake up fresh and get a good night's sleep because your CO2 levels are good and your PM exposures are down to 0, you will automatically have a better quality of life and a healthier life. There are multiple standards on air quality in terms of there's the reset standard, there's the IAQA, there's no standard for IAQ, but there are guidelines. Then there's the IEQ standard, which again was published by ISHRAE a couple of years ago, and revision 2 was published earlier this year only. And there are the WELL standard, the IGBC health and well-being standard, all of them today are talking about air quality as part of the standards. And it's very important to understand that more and more focus is going on air quality today, because not only is it important from a health and productivity perspective, but in today's world with COVID-19, a lot of focus has gone on air quality and air filtration. One of the recent documents also written as a guidance document for HVAC by ISHRAE for COVID-19 talks about H13 filtration, certified H13 filtration, which can remove not only a PM 2.5 particles, but any air that passes through a certified H13 filter will also remove all COVID-19 particles from the air. So having the right filtration in place can ensure that you can remove the particles that are harmful for you from a short-term health perspective and from a long-term health perspective and protect you. And monitoring that and ensuring that your numbers of your PM 2.5, your CO2 and other gases are in the safe or healthy range can give you that peace of mind and make that invisible visible for you. So I think I've finished a little bit earlier. It's 6:37. Happy to take questions from questions now, if that's okay. Normally, I'm looking for the questions over here. If you can type your questions in the chat panel, then I can read out the questions and try and give the answers for the same as well.
I'd request to share your mail ID also, so that if anyone has questions, they can send across you.
Sure. I'm going to type it out over here. So hopefully you can. I've just sent my email ID in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see it, and you're welcome to send me an email later on. I think early on the first slide, my email ID is there as well. So if you download the handouts, you can quite easily find the same over there.
Yeah, Mr. Barunji, you can see some questions. Is ventilation recommended to bring down particulate matter concentration?
Yes. So the first question is on ventilation. Absolutely. One of the most important things with regards to reducing or improving air quality is dilution. And for dilution, ventilation is the key on dilution. So by bringing fresh air from outside, you're able to dilute your carbon dioxide, you're able to dilute your TVOCs, but you need the right kind of filtration so that you ensure that any outdoor pollutants that you bring in are removed before you bring them in. So absolutely, you want to remove any outdoor pollutants, but bring in lots of fresh air. Different facilities are recommended different number of air changes. In terms of healthcare facilities, we would recommend 8 to 10 air changes per hour. Normal commercial facilities, we would recommend anywhere from 2 to 4 air changes per hour. But ventilation is a very, very important part of that. Okay, the next question I see is, how do I decide upon which air filter to buy? Is it based on the number of people or square footage area? The answer to that is actually simple. There are two things that you want to look at primarily. The first is the certification of the filter. You want to get a filter which has an H13 certification, ideally. And second of all, you want to calculate the number of air changes per hour. And for a normal home, you can get something with 2 to 3 air changes per hour. And the way to calculate that is calculate the total the cubic feet of air in that room, the size of the room, and the CFM of air coming out from that machine at a speed which is reasonable from a sound perspective. When you divide the two, multiplied by 60, you'll get air changes per hour. Typically, you want 2 to 3 air changes per hour. The next question, are there any value-added courses that certify a person to qualify to be a building consultant with regards to the indoor environment? That's a great question, Mr. Yathesh. Yes, there are some courses. Reset has a Reset AP course with regard. Reset has a Reset AP course with regards to indoor air quality, and that course can be taken. I believe they're even offering that online right now, and that will help a building consultant understand IAQ better and help their clients with regards to that. I didn't read in any medical reviews anything about pulse oximeter. Do I need to have one? So another good question. There are articles that have come out in the New York Times. There was a doctor in New York who's been practicing in Bellevue Hospital for 10 years. And he wrote about how blood oxygen saturation levels for patients who have COVID-19 has come down tremendously. In fact, once the pneumonia hits the lungs, SpO2 levels were as low as 55–60%. And he talked about that being an early indicator. If you Google it, there are lots of articles which will tell you that yes, it can be an early indicator. There are some articles which will also tell you that no, you don't need to get an oximeter, but that is your choice now whether you want to get one and understand what the health of your lungs is or not. It's not a very expensive device. You can get one for as little as 1,500 to 3,000 rupees, depending on the quality. I recommend getting one which is FDA approved if you get one. I belong from a pilgrimage place. I want to measure air quality during annual fair. How can I? Great question, sir. Air quality can be measured with real-time monitors, which are available very easily today. There are multiple manufacturers and suppliers of air quality measuring devices available in the country. There are a couple that we work with very closely. You can go to their websites and buy the product. There's Kythera, there's Ayurveda, there's a couple of others that are locally available across the country. So one of the key things is finding companies that are local that will give you the service when something goes wrong, because the nature of an air quality sensor is that it will get damaged over a period of time, because as dirty air goes through, it will start to impact the sensor, and it will need either calibration or change. So make sure that you get the proper support from whoever you buy the sensor from. You can buy the sensor, keep it with you, and then you can measure the air quality during the fair. If you want to get a professional agency to come and test during the fair, you can do that. But my recommendation would be that you get a constant 24/7 monitor. Air Visual is another product that is available, which will give you PM 2.5 and CO2 readings in one single sensor. Is monitoring device works on sampling rate, Mr. Vipin Pahuja? All monitoring devices work on a sampling rate. So they have a tiny fan on them and they pull a certain amount of air, and that air is then tested. Now the sampling rate is not a chemical sampling rate in terms of a There's no chemicals or liquids which are utilized in the monitoring devices. These are digital sensors. So if, for example, a particulate sensor has a laser and mirrors, when air comes through at a certain rate and the laser beam hits the air, which is full of particles, the particles, the scattering that happens of the light because the particles hit that laser beam. And when the laser light scatters, the mirror catches the scatter and then it calculates based on the scatter how many particles would be there in that stream of air based on the amount of air that is coming through. And that's how they then convert an analog signal into a digital signal and tell you what is the number of particles. They assume the mass or they assume the density of the particles and then convert it and tell you what the mass reading for that would be. So that's how it is done. But sampling rate, yes, there is a specific rate at which air is coming through a monitor, and that is your sampling rate, and that's what it is then converting and telling you. Is UVGI effective against COVID-19? It's an excellent question, and it's a very difficult question. UVGI is, in fact, I read a very interesting paper which talked about the history of UVGI when it was discovered in the late 1870s up till today, and why it has not gotten mainstream acceptance. There's been a lot of hits and misses with UVGI. There have been lots of good tests that have happened which has shown it to be effective against certain viruses. But there have been others or other tests also where it has shown not to be very effective. Chances are it is because of the way UVGI is installed and the effectiveness in terms of the lamp, in terms of the wavelength of the lamp. It needs to be 254 or 253.7 nanometers or as close to that to be as effective as possible. And there's a lot of science behind it. If deployed correctly, UVGI can be effective, but if it is specifically effective against COVID-19 or not is not yet completely scientifically proven. So I don't want to say, yes, it will work against COVID-19 because we're not sure unless and until scientifically we have absolute clarity. We don't want to be able to say that, yes, it will work and lead someone the wrong way potentially. What is the difference between a HEPA and an ULPA filter? A HEPA filter is anything that is HEPA in my world is certified, should be certified, high efficiency particulate arrestor, and ULPA is ultra particulate arrestor. So ultra is typically you would go into the higher levels of HEPA would be an ULPA. In terms of efficiency of filtration and in terms of pressure drop, I feel that as long as you have a H12, H13, H14 filter, you don't necessarily need to go into ULPA filters for standard applications, i.e. commercial offices, homes. You don't need ULPA filters. Only if you have very specific applications where you need an ULPA filter, then only you would go for one of those extreme, because the pressure drop on those is very high, and only then would you go with something like that, because the cost differential and the pressure drop would make it otherwise unfeasible to put in normal applications. Now, as COVID-19 is going on, but what we need to consider parameters regarding COVID-19 during the design of HVAC system. So during the design of HVAC system, I think the three key fundamentals, what we need to understand from an HVAC perspective is A, fresh air, ventilation. We must always design HVAC systems, and now more so with higher amount of fresh air than the absolute minimum. The biggest challenge we have is that our fresh air is kept closed even if they are designed in order to save energy. That should not be done. When designing, try and design it with maximum amount of fresh air. I would say even if you can go above 10% and get 15 to 20% of fresh air into the system, that would be even better. That's number one. The second thing would be filtration. You've got to design your system with better quality filtration. Just a simple G4 filter is no longer acceptable. We are saying that in an HVAC system, you want to have a minimum MERV 13 filter. And if you can get an H13, which is a MERV 17 equivalent, with a recirculation within the space, within the office space, within the occupied space, then that is even better. So first is ventilation, the second is filtration, and then of course you got to ensure from a temperature and humidity perspective are the four pillars with regards to HVAC design. Yeah, temperature from COVID-19 perspective, we are recommending between 26 to 30 degrees centigrade, and for relative humidity between 40 to 65, 45 to 65%, 40 to 70 is the recommended range, but if you can keep it between 45% RH to 65% RH, that's your most optimal RH with regards to COVID-19, because viruses can spread more when it goes outside this range of relative humidity. Missed the earlier slides, wanted to know with COVID scenario, do we still have to bother much about PM 2.5 in a city like Delhi? Well, yes, the answer to that is right now PM 2.5 has come down dramatically in a city like Delhi and northern India, but doesn't mean it is still good. Right now, outdoors, I'm getting reading of anywhere from 30 micrograms per cubic meter to 70 micrograms. Normally, it would be 150 or 200. It is definitely much better, but it's not zero. Now, there's an article, the article I talked about earlier with regards to COVID-19 and PM 2.5 correlation. It talks about a study that has been done in the United States where even a 1 microgram per cubic meter increased exposure of PM 2.5 has led to increased mortality because of COVID-19. 1 microgram. And they're talking about the US EPA is talking about reducing the limit from 12 micrograms per cubic meter as the standard for indoor down to 9, because even from 12 to 9, it has a huge impact on health. And here we think that, oh, it's come down from 150 to 50, so we're safe now. No, we're not. We need to work hard to bring it down to 0, and that's not possible because we have a huge amount of other issues around Delhi. Our power plants are still functional and they are coal-based power plants, and hence there's a lot of PM 2.5 that is coming from the coal-fired power plants. A lot of waste garbage burning is happening because the municipal corporations are not working 100% and not taking away the waste all the time. So there's a lot of challenges with regards to PM 2.5 because of waste burning, because of crop burning, because of the coal-fired power plants, which we still need to worry about. Ideally, your exposure to PM 2.5 should be 0. And the day you can get it to completely 0, that day you can say, I don't need to worry about PM 2.5. Okay, we covered this one. VRV units are becoming popular, with some installations introducing fresh air through the ceiling cassettes. How does this affect cooling, heating, load, and performance or durability of the units? Do you recommend this practice? So absolutely, I recommend this practice, but it's very important that we treat the fresh air with some level of filtration before we introduce it through a VRV unit. If you just connect a fresh air opening to a VRV, a cassette unit, then all the dust that comes from outside will potentially come in and not only damage the unit over a period of time, but also allow a lot of the pollutants from outdoors to come inside. So filtering and treating that fresh air before you connect it to cassette units or VRV units is very important. So a TFA normally has a very basic G4 filter. Ideally, you want better filtration on your TFA if you're putting a TFA so that you have better quality air in your entire facility. If you can do the cooling beforehand, then the loads will obviously, the loads have to be calculated based on whether you have treated load before in terms of TFA or you don't. So automatically your loads will need to be calculated properly. But otherwise, the main issue in the Indian subcontinent is the air quality. A lot of people complain that the copper pipes of the ACs are getting damaged in certain locations because of hydrogen sulfide gas outside. The copper will get corroded and the gas starts leaking, and that's a huge problem in many parts of India. So if you're bringing that kind of air inside, if it can corrode copper pipes, imagine what it can do to human lungs. So it's very important that you take care of the air in terms of filtration before you bring it in any way. How can a residential family take care in such a scenario, especially during winters? Well, the answer to that is not difficult. I struggled with this for many years and I was able to find out a solution. We've got a solution in my house, for example, where my PM 2.5 in the winter time, even the day after Diwali, in my bedroom, my PM 2.5 is 0. My CO2 stays at 600, my TVOCs are close to 0. So we've got nearly perfect air quality, 0. When I say 0, it's actually 0. I've taken a particle counter and got readings of close to 0. So the readings in our bedroom are, and it can be done. And now based on that, I tried it out for 1 year. I ensured it was A, technically possible, B, commercially feasible. And now we've got hundreds of homes, thousands of homes in Delhi who've got a solution like that, and it can be done. I'm not going to go into the details in terms of commercial aspects of products because this is not the right platform. If anybody has questions about that, we can talk about it later. Could you please tell how to reduce PM 2.5 diameter of a particulate? Is there any device to dissect the size of particulate? Ooh, that's an interesting question. I've never got that one before, but I don't know if you can reduce the size or dissect the size of a particle. It is already so small that you can't see it with the naked eye. I don't know why would you want to dissect it or reduce it. You just want to remove it. So I don't have an answer to dissecting. I've never tried to dissect a particulate of 2.5 micrometers in diameter. In case any customer wants to conduct this study and analysis in their commercial building, say office building, what should be an approximate cost implication that we can suggest to them? A range of budget based on basic, medium, high range of measurements is also okay. That's a really tough question because it depends on the size of the facility. It depends on the number of monitors. So for example, we've done monitoring for a facility for as little as 20,000 rupees. I've done monitoring for one single building for even 1.5 crores of rupees. So the range is very, very high depending on many factors. How many sensors do you want? How many locations are there? Which quality of sensor do you want? How many parameters do you want to measure? What kind of dashboard do you want? Do you want to connect all of them onto one single dashboard and control things? So there's a lot of various, and the size of the space is probably the most critical. But to give you a very ballpark idea, if I was doing 24/7 monitoring in a building, in an office of say 5,000 square feet, I would put 2 monitors on average. 2 monitors would cost me about, a reset certified monitor would be approximately 40 to 50, 40, 45,000 rupees plus the dashboard. So say a lakh of rupees, I can do pretty decent air quality monitoring for 5 parameters, which would include PM 2.5, CO2, temperature, humidity, and TVOCs. So 5 parameter monitors, 2 of them in a small facility is enough. So the larger the facility, the number of monitors would increase, and accordingly your cost would increase. There's a little bit extra cost for installation, for dashboard access, for maintenance, which you need to ensure that you add to that number. But ballpark, that would be the range. If you call a laboratory to come in and do a one-time test, again, it depends on how many samples and which parameters. But minimum cost to call a lab in would be about anywhere from 10 to 20,000 rupees, going upwards depending again on how many samples and how many tests you get done. What is a better option for MERV 13 rating filters to control PM 2.5, EAC filters or conventional media filters? Yeah, so this is again a great question. So MERV 13 is the minimum recommendation that we give for media filters for HVAC systems. Ideally, you want an H13 filter. There is a big difference between a MERV 13 and an H13 filter. An H13 filter is certified to remove PM 2.5 particles all the way down to 0.003 microns with an efficiency of 99.95%. And that is what we want given the current situation. And an H13 is equivalent to MERV 17. So MERV 17 media filters are safest and best. Any kind of electric filter, whether it's an electrostatic precipitator or any other electric filter, ionizer, ozonizer, ESP, etc., potentially has contraindications, and you have to be very careful when you use those to ensure that anything negative is removed before you actually use those kinds of technologies. The last question for the day, will VRV units be better to counter contamination due to ventilation as the air is not directly injected into the closed areas? Well, I don't think I understand this question very well. VRV units, normally there are two ways to install VRV units. One where there is absolutely no fresh air, no ventilation, and it is just recirculation units for indoor units. The outdoor units are only passing refrigerant. The indoor units are only recirculating the air within the space. In that case, there's no contamination from outside, but your indoor pollutants start to increase because there's no dilution, there's no fresh air, and that becomes a big problem in the long run. The second way is that when you have a TFA unit connected to your indoor units, that is the correct way of doing it, but your TFA needs to have the right level of filtration so that there's no contamination in your indoor spaces and your closed areas get clean, fresh air constantly. So the right way with the VRV unit is you've got your VRV system, get a TFA unit with high quality filtration, so that whatever fresh air gets injected is high quality fresh air, and it will also keep your space in positive pressurization. Very, very important to do that because it will ensure a very overall high quality of air within the entire space. It is right at 7:01. Hopefully the presentation was of some value. Hopefully the questions were answered reasonably. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your time for being available for a presentation in the evening. I have enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you again, everyone.
Mr. Varun, thank you so much for sharing such an informative session. And at this pandemic time, we need to have that type of session. So we appreciate those sessions, you know, and looking forward for more. Now, I would like to request Mr. Amit Kakkar of Jaipur chapter, ASHRAE Jaipur Rajasthan chapter, to give vote of thanks to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Varun, for your nice presentation on the very valid, topic of the time, and you were very instrumental in explaining the things very well, and your the manner in which you explained was really excellent. The slides were too good and clear. And you told about the various sensors, instruments, placements, and their locations, calibrations, interpretation of data, and the results based on the automation and the manual operations. And in this 60 minutes lecture, what I have seen that 35 minutes were given to the presentation and 25 minutes were for question and answers. And the question answer session was again a very good session in which you were able to explain about the SPO2, UVGI, and the HVAC design in reference to the requirements of fresh air, filtration, and temperature, humidity. Then the answers related to PM 2.5 and TFAs of cassette ACs and the residential requirements, then costings and other things were very well explained. So I am really thankful to Mr. Varun for such a good explanation. And I am, as an individual, I am a fan of Varun Agarwal, and I have heard various other webinars of him. So in the end, I thanks Varun for his excellent presentation, and I wish that whenever we will be requiring Varun, he will always give his services to ASHRAE Rajasthan chapter. And thanks to ASHRAE India chapter and Mr. Shailendra Kasera for organizing this webinar for the members of ASHRAE India chapter and ASHRAE Rajasthan chapter. Thanks, Varun Agarwal once again. Thank you very much.
A special thanks to Osama also from RAL. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Osama.
yeah. I forget to mention that. Sorry.
Not
Thanks,
to forget, he
Osama.
is the main man after this organization. Okay.
And
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to you
Thanks
also.
to everyone.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.